Hi, and welcome to Amy's Opinions. Today we're going to be I'm joined by my sister Mary, my husband Lawrence, who's having some video issues, so you'll just hear his voice. And today we're going to be talking about the benefits of renting, apartment living, condo living, house living, and owning a house. So all three of us have lived in an apartment of some sort. Lawrence and I have lived in military housing. We've all rented a house. We've all had renters, either renting out rooms or renting our house. We've all bought and sold a house. And so I want to just kind of, that's the basis for this is, in our opinion, what's better to own a house, to own a condo, to rent a house, to rent an apartment, the risk and benefits of everything. So Mary, let's start with you because you just recently sold your house, and this was the first house you bought and sold, correct?
Right.
Okay.
I didn't want to leave the house, but I physically and due to certain personal issues in my life couldn't afford to stay in the house.
All right. Now you bought a condo, correct?
Yeah, I was able to pay cash for a condo, and that helps me tremendously because I do have really bad back issues. I don't have a yard to maintain or a pool to maintain. That's done for me.
Okay.
And then the other thing I like about condo living versus the house is every time I go outside to take the dogs out, someone says hi. Or in the house, I was more isolated, so that, that's a bonus for me.
So I think, correct me if you guys think I'm wrong, but usually when young adults leave their parents' house, they go into a rental situation. Like our first rental place, Lawrence, was an apartment. We took over your sister's rent in Wenatchee, and then we moved to Yakima, and we rented a house in Virginia, or an apartment in Virginia, until we got to military housing. Mary, you went from home to a dorm into you rented an apartment.
Yeah.
What are some of the benefits as a young adult, do you think, with renting an apartment versus trying to buy a house right out of moving, staying at home and living until you can afford a house? You know what?
You learn a lot about budgeting when you get into a rental situation. You learn more about money management, making your money last, and setting goals and keeping them. That's
Okay, Lawrence,
what
what were
I
some of
think
the
a rental does.
Okay, Lawrence, what were some of the benefits for you when when we rented an apartment?
Well, renting is it takes a lot of the responsibility of maintenance off of the renter's shoulders. So you don't necessarily have to budget for your plumbing going out or your heater going out, your air conditioning, things of that nature. When stuff like that comes up, you call your rental agent or the building super and they come and they take care of it. And obviously, unless you're neglectfully causing damage or negligently causing damage to it, you're not going to have to pay for those. So, in that respect, renting is good for you, especially if you're young and you don't have a lot of disposable income, things that you can readily have available should you need it, should disaster strike. That makes a big difference and takes a lot of stress out of just your day to day living.
Okay. What are some of the cons of living in an apartment?
Me?
Anyone want to go yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. You have neighbors above you and to the sides of you. So you have to really be mindful of your noise level, and hopefully they do the same. So you just want to be careful, like, how do you say it? Like, your personal life stays personal in your walls because in an apartment community, people talk a lot. At least that's my experience.
So there's a lot of gossip.
Yeah.
I always put off apartment living as almost akin to staying in a hotel because you can hear almost everything around you. And when we lived in apartments or we lived in a duplex, because we did that for a little bit, it was always frustrating. Like if you work night shift and you have to sleep during the day, there was so much noise. Or if you were trying to discipline your kids, or like at one point when Lewis was a baby, we had the MPs called on us because I set the timer and put him down so I could do dishes, and he cried the whole time. And the MPs came because our neighbors, instead of coming up and checking on him and checking on me, called the MPs because they thought I was neglecting my son. when all I was doing was trying to get dishes done. So, I set a timer for like 20 minutes. So, that way, if he didn't stop crying within 20 minutes, I'd go in and comfort him. And, I was trying to help him learn how to self soothe. But we had those type of neighbors who are like, oh no, they're neglecting their baby versus, hey, come up and talk to me. I can tell you exactly what's going on. I wasn't neglecting him. I was just trying to get something done without holding this baby, 24/7. Lawrence, what were some of the downsides of an apartment and duplex living that you've felt we had?
Well, other than the obvious, your neighbors are right on top of you and everything. You don't own it. It is not yours. So any type of change that you want to make, you have to have permission. So even though it's your home and you're living in it, it's not really yours. You want to paint a room, you got to get permission. You want to change a lighting fixture, you got to get permission. Some places, if you want to put any kind of flowers or plants or anything, you have to have permission. And just living somewhere that's not really yours, it's not fun.
Okay. Now let's talk about. Go ahead.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And I wanted to talk about buying a condo. It's sort of similar to apartment living, but you do own it. So, like, I was able to pull out the flooring and put in new floors and decorate how I wanted. So, I don't know if you were going to get into condo living or.
Yeah, we'll definitely touch
Okay.
base on that. I want to talk about buying the house for the first time. So, we've all been first time home buyers. You bought a house that was already built. Lawrence and I actually paid, we had our house built. Does that make it was a planned community that they were building houses and we were able to build our house per se.
It was a new build home. It wasn't like a custom built or anything. It was a builder, a contractor who was building all the homes in the neighborhood. But we still had a lot of leeway in choosing what design of the house we kind of wanted, the floor plan, what was included in the house, what upgrades we wanted, that sort of thing.
Now, we've been lucky we've been able to do VA loans. We don't have to have a lot of money down. You didn't get to do a VA loan. So how was that with you financially trying to get money down to buy your first house?
I did an FHA loan, which
Okay.
is 3% down. You pay the 3% cash. Without qualifying for that, I wouldn't have been able to buy the home.
Now, we had problems with our new built house because we had some issues we had a pipe burst because of the cold weather and we had water in there. We had some house settling issues and things like that, that in the first few years that we had to deal with when we had that house. And then we turned it into a rental, sort of like when you rented out the rooms for that. So going from buying the house, the loan process was fairly easy. The inspection process was fairly easy, and moving was fairly easy. There's a lot of people that help you through those processes that if you know where to go to, it's easy to get the information. No. Did you have someone help you with that with your loan?
Yeah.
Okay. Lawrence, do you want to add in on any of this? Or are you good? You're good. Okay. So let's talk about renters. So, like we were saying earlier, we rented out our first home because we'd only been in it for about 3 years when we moved, not quite 5 years. So it wasn't feasible for us to sell it. We would have lost money on it. So we turned to a rental agency. You had to rent out your house for certain things because you had some personal issues. So you had to rent out your rooms to help pay for your mortgage, correct? So one of the things I would say with our rental process is we did go through an agency versus where you did yours, personally. We went through an agency to handle everything. Property manager. The first property manager we had, we actually fired, and that was before we even started the process. He and I had a disagreement. We fired him, and it was kind of ugly. Then we had another property manager, and he made sure that we had enough to cover our mortgage. That's all we cared about, was just enough money to cover our mortgage, and that we got good people in there. But then when we had people who couldn't pay rent, we had to pay our mortgage. So we had to have extra money saved up to pay our mortgage in case they couldn't pay, or when they were late, or they trashed, or their deposits didn't cover the damage they did to the house. And we had a lot of issues with that. So after about 9 years of owning that house, we decided to sell it and get rid of it because we were just not made to be landlords. How did that go with, that's our experience. How was that with you with renting out rooms and actually living with your tenants?
Living with them was fine. You had to be very selective on who you chose to bring into the home because I have
Okay.
some anxiety issues around certain situations. I had to be very upfront with people, like, this is my issue, this is how I deal with it. and we're gonna coexist. Other than that, it wasn't too bad. We got renters in fairly quickly. Nobody trashed the place. I think because I was there,
Okay.
they didn't feel like they could disrespect my items.
All right. Now, what about selling the house? This is what I stressed out the most is selling the house. When we sold the house, our first house, because it had been a rental property, we had to pay more for taxes on it because we weren't buying another place to live on. So we actually ended up paying like $9,000 taxes after the sale of the house. And it took about 3 months for us to sell the house. And it was fairly stressful to sell a house when you're living in another state. How was that for you selling your house where you were still living in it?
It was difficult because it took about 6 months of showing it before we found a buyer. And I had to be ready at any moment to take the dogs out so someone could come look at it. So it always had to be like spotless.
See, we went through that with our second house in California. We were still living in it. And what we did, because we had children who were middle schoolers and high schoolers, and they were slobs, just like their parents, we paid for a housekeeper to come in twice a week to keep up on the house so it was already show ready. And we told the kids anything the housekeeper had to pick up of theirs was going to be thrown away. So we actually spent more money trying to keep our house ready to be shown at a moment's notice and the dogs taken care of and things like that versus if we would have left the house empty. And I will say this, we did get a was it St. Joseph or St. Francis statue?
Joseph.
Yeah, St. Joseph statue, and we buried it out in the yard. And I know there's a lot of different beliefs around that, but it seemed like once we did that, we sold the house within 2 weeks.
Me too. Tammy
So
sent me one and I buried it, and like 2 or 3 weeks later I was under contract.
so maybe it's not as big of a myth as people think.
Yeah.
What do you think, Lawrence?
Honestly, if it works, it's not stupid. And it seemed to work. So whether it's just pure coincidence or there's something behind it, it doesn't matter to me. It works. I'm happy.
And we now have that statue up where it's visible. So when we go to sell this house, and it's like 3 inches tall, then we'll bury it again. And if we ever sell this house, then that's what we'll do. Now let's talk about the benefits of animals having a house and yard and children, because we do have kids, versus an apartment where you have to take your animals or your children to a playground or out for a walk when they have to use the bathroom. Not kids, animals, that sort of a thing. I found it easier when we had a yard with our children growing up that they could go out in the backyard, they could play. I could send them, I knew they were safe, and I have to go with them so I could get things done around the house. With the dogs, when we were in apartments, I was pregnant, so trying to walk the dogs being pregnant, that was kind of rough. Oh, that's kind of funny and kind of rough. Anyways, to me, it was easier to live in a house situation with animals and kids. Now, what are your thoughts on that, Bear?
Well, when I moved to Tucson, I had two dogs, a German Shepherd Rot mix, and a chocolate lab. I lived in an apartment with them, and thought the German Shepherd mix was miserable. She hated it. She loved to run. So when I got the house, I made sure to get a big yard. And she perked right up and was happy. And when you're in an apartment situation, dogs like to follow a schedule. So as long as you can stick to a schedule, like we're doing this at this time, they're pretty happy. I do have to say, when I moved into the house and got the dog door where they could go in and out as they please, they seemed happier.
Okay. What about you, Lawrence? What do you like? Benefits or cons of apartment living versus house living?
I grew up in a house. I was happy that we were able to provide a house for our children when they were growing up. An apartment is, in my opinion, great for a single person starting out early in life or even a young married couple that's just starting out. But by the time you start bringing pets and children into the family, a house benefits way outweigh that of an apartment. Just having the extra room and being able to kind of spread out a little bit. You're not so confined in as you would be in an apartment. You don't have to worry about neighbors when your kids are throwing tantrums or trying to get to sleep late at night and having your neighbors throwing a party right next to you. When you can afford it, the house is the way to go.
Now, like Mary says, she owns her condo. It's similar to apartment living, except for she can make changes to it because she owns that unit. So, do you have an HOA?
Yes.
Okay, so let's touch a little bit on HOAs because I know Lawrence is very, very much against them, and you're living in an HOA. Are you happy with your HOA?
I have a lot of experience. I paid 2 months of HOA, and they keep the grounds really nice. They work on them 6 days a week. They have groundskeepers out working on that in the pools, but the boiler's gone out twice. So we've had like 4 days where we didn't have any hot water. So I don't know. I think they should have fixed it sooner, but also I'm the type of person that wants things done now.
Okay, so we had a HOA. We lived in one HOA. That was where we bought our first house. And it was supposed to be to keep up the grounds and make playgrounds and things like that for the kids in the community, but not our yards. So we had to do our own yard. I remember they came and gave us a notice once because we were letting the grass seed to kind of replant the grass, and we were a little bit late on mowing our yard, and we got notice for it. And they raised the fees, but with the stuff that they were supposed to upkeep, they weren't upkeeping. But they were charging people fines, but then they weren't seeing the go back towards the community. Like the playgrounds, they made wooden playgrounds, and the playgrounds were starting to rot and fall apart. There was trash everywhere. It wasn't a good experience for us with the HOA. I believe that if you buy a property, it's up to you and how you want to keep it. I mean, there's certain people like, in a condo environment, I see the benefits of a HOA, for the pool maintenance, the grounds maintenance, and things like that. But in a house environment, I don't see the benefits of it. I really
I
don't see
want
the benefits of a HOA.
to buy a house, like a standalone house in an HOA.
Yeah, because I mean,
I
you
wouldn't
can't have
even look
certain
at it.
animals. Yeah, you
Yeah.
can't have certain animals at HOAs. You can't have certain things. To me, it's not worth it. I don't want someone telling me what I can do with my own property. What about you, Lawrence?
Well, we really get lucked out with our HOA experience. It wasn't a great experience, but it was nowhere near the horror stories that you hear. 100% individual houses in a community, it's absolutely ridiculous to have an HOA. If you're going to have a condo, that makes sense because then the community in that condo provides for the upkeep and the maintenance that, say, an apartment building, your rent would be paying a super to take care of that sort of stuff. So it's similar there, and it makes sense there. But anytime that you hand authority over to an outside party that tells you how you can and can't use your own personal property is absolutely ridiculous.
See, and I agree. Now, Mary, do you want to touch base a little bit more on condo living and the benefits for you with the back problems and keep it up on the house, or do you
Yeah.
think we've covered it?
I think we covered it.
Okay.
Was there any difference for you, Mary, between buying your house and then buying the condo, or was it still pretty much the same?
Process was pretty much the same. The only difference was is I had to apply through the HOA and have a background check and a credit check, and I had to put in a special request to have 3 dogs instead of one. So it worked out.
Okay, good. Lawrence, do you have any more thoughts on this?
Nope, I think I've pretty much said my piece.
All right. So, in my opinion, buying houses, it can be difficult, can be tricky. It's good to get a professional. I would never want to be a landlord again. I did not enjoy that process. I wouldn't want to live in an HOA with a standalone house. I think apartments are great for people who are starting out in life. I think they're great for people who don't need the house or can't keep up on the house. I think the situation you're in, Mary, where you own your own condo so that you can change the living arrangements in your house with the HOA, I think that's perfect for you. I really do. I'm glad you got that. I think, you have to look at what fits you and your lifestyle and what's appropriate. Is one better than the other? It depends on your lifestyle and depends on you. And that's just my opinion. Any closing thoughts for you, Bear?
No.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us today. And that concludes the session of Amy's Opinions. Thank you.